I chose Marcus because for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw me. Just me.
I built everything with these two hands, and I put her on the floor. That's where I start.
I have negotiated with presidents, and then my daughter was born, and I learned what fear actually was. You cannot negotiate love. I shook his hand. That was a contract, and he broke it. So I responded, completely without apology.
I raised that boy alone. Do you understand what that means? I spent 30 years building that boy's confidence. So when I saw that woman, I paid attention. Because a mother pays attention. My son deserves to have the same information. My son deserves, I told him he had leverage. I have made every decision from that place, from the terror of fixed struggle. But sitting here now, at this, I wonder if love without wisdom is just damage with good intentions.
It is the sound of a child crying in a place where children should not have to cry. A hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, under flickering fluorescent lights, on a cold tile floor in Atlanta, Georgia. And in that sound, on February 14th, there was something else layered underneath it. Something that cut through the crying, through the exhaustion, through the cold air of that building. It was the sound of a man's footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, walking away, not pausing, not hesitating, just gone, through the exit doors, into the dark parking lot, and into what would become the single greatest mistake of his entire life. Elena would say later, quietly, almost to herself, that she kept telling herself he just needed air, that he would come back. But deep down, the moment those doors closed, she felt something shift in her that she had never felt before. Like something had been decided without her consent. His name was Marcus Cole. He was 33 years old. He had a business, a wife, and a 7-month-old daughter burning with fever on that hospital floor. And he left them all behind. What Marcus Cole did not know, could not have known, because she had kept it from him for years, not out of deception, but out of a love so deep and so deliberate that it looked, from the outside, like a secret, was that the woman he left on that cold floor was not who he thought she was. Or rather, she was exactly who he thought she was. She was Elena, his wife. The woman who had laughed at his terrible jokes, shown up at his job site with lunch on long days, held his hand through every financial storm without ever once making him feel small. She was all of that. But she was also the only daughter of Raymond Brooks, founder of Brooks Capital Group, a man whose name did not appear in celebrity magazines or on morning talk shows, but whose signature moved billions of dollars across 14 countries as quietly and as inevitably as a tide. Raymond Brooks was a man who had built everything he had on one principle: patience. You do not react. You respond. And when his daughter called him from that hospital, he did not react. But he responded. Swiftly. And completely. Elena Brooks was the heir to one of the largest private fortunes in the United States of America. And Marcus Cole had left her on the floor of Grady Memorial Hospital on Valentine's Day. Before we go any further into this story, we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because this story is one of those rare ones that gets more complicated and more human the deeper you go into it. It is not a simple story about a bad man. It is not a simple story about a good woman. It is a story about pride, about secrets, about the ways we try to protect the people we love, and how those protections can quietly become the very thing that destroys what we were trying to save. To understand February 14th, you have to go back much further. You have to go back to the beginning. Not the beginning of Marcus and Elena's relationship, but the beginning of Elena herself. Because without understanding who Elena Brooks was and why she made the choices she made, nothing that follows will make any sense. Elena was born in Savannah, Georgia, the only child of Raymond Brooks and his late wife, Carolyn. Carolyn Brooks passed away from ovarian cancer when Elena was 11 years old. and by all accounts, her death was the event that shaped both Raymond and Elena in ways that would quietly echo through everything that came after. Raymond Brooks had built his company through the 1980s and 1990s, starting in commercial real estate in Savannah, then expanding into infrastructure contracts, then pharmaceutical distribution logistics, then private equity. He was not a flashy man. He did not seek attention. People who worked with him over the decades described him consistently in the same terms: measured, precise, extraordinarily patient, and almost frightening in how far ahead he could see. Carolyn had once told him that the most dangerous thing money does is make people perform. They perform gratitude. They perform loyalty. Raymond never wanted Elena to live inside someone else's performance of who she was supposed to be. And his daughter grew up watching him. She grew up watching how people changed when they were around his money. She watched the friends who drifted toward her for the wrong reasons. She watched the men who were interested in her last name and not in her. She watched the way rooms shifted when her father walked into them, not because of anything he said, but because of what people believed he could do for them. And she grew up deciding, with the quiet conviction of a child who has seen too much too early, that she wanted something different. She wanted to be known before she was known for her last name. She wanted to be chosen before she was valuable. That desire, that very human, very understandable desire, was the first thread in the long unraveling that would eventually land her on the floor of a hospital in Atlanta with her baby beside her and her husband walking away.
People would always ask Elena why she did not simply tell him. Her answer was always the same: because she had spent her entire life watching what that information does to people. It changes the air in the room. She wanted to breathe normal air for a little while longer. When Elena enrolled at Howard University in Washington, D.C., she did something that required her father's cooperation and his lawyer's reluctant, near-apoplectic consent. She asked to study and live under her mother's maiden name, Brooks, which was fortunately common enough not to signal anything to most people, rather than under the family's more prominent legal identity tied to Brooks Capital Group's public filings. She wanted, she told her father, one real life before the weight of everything settled in for good. Raymond Brooks had agreed. Not easily, not without conditions, but he had agreed because he understood his daughter and because he knew that what she was asking for was not foolishness. It was wisdom, the kind that comes from growing up watching how money can hollow out the people around it if they are not careful. She walked into his office, sat down across from him, and said simply, "Daddy, I want to earn my own trust before I inherit yours." He looked at her for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and called his lawyer. What else could he do? Howard gave Elena what she had hoped it would. She built genuine friendships with people who had no idea who her father was, no idea about the estate in Savannah, no idea about the private jet or the investment portfolios or the Forbes mentions. She was just Elena. Smart, warm, curious about everything. The kind of person who remembered what you told her 3 weeks ago and asked about it the next time she saw you. She graduated with a master's degree in public policy and took a job with the city of Atlanta in their urban development office. The salary was decent, but not remarkable. The work was meaningful. She chose it on purpose. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was honest about what it was. Not struggling, not glamorous, just real. And she had been living that real life for 2 years when she walked into a coffee shop in downtown Atlanta one Thursday afternoon and sat down near the window with a policy brief and a cup of tea. She did not look up when a broad-shouldered man in a dusty contractor's jacket walked through the door. She would remember later that he sat down without her saying it was okay, which should have annoyed her. But he had a look on his face, not arrogant, just certain, like he had already decided this was going to be worth his time. She thought to herself, well, let's see if you're right about that. Marcus Cole had grown up in Southwest Atlanta in a household where money was not discussed because there was never enough of it to discuss. His mother, Diane Cole, had raised him largely on her own after his father left when Marcus was 6 years old. Diane was sharp-witted, proud, and deeply determined that her son would not inherit the financial anxiety that had defined her own life. She told him constantly, working hard was the only ladder that mattered, and a man who built something with his own hands built something that could not be taken. Marcus had absorbed that completely. He had gone to trade school after high school, earned his certifications, and spent 6 years working for other people's construction companies before he saved enough to start his own. Marcus Cole Construction had 3 employees, 2 active contracts, and a real office with his name on the door by the time he was 31. He was not rich. He was becoming something. And that difference between having arrived and becoming was the whole architecture of his self-worth. People who had not started with nothing did not understand what it meant, Marcus would say. Not a connection, not a loan, not anybody's last name behind you. Just your hands and your word. That office, his name on that door, was the first time in his life he felt like he was standing on solid ground. When he first saw Elena in that coffee shop, sitting absolutely still in the middle of the afternoon noise, natural thick dark wavy hair loose around her shoulders, rich deep brown skin catching the light through the window, he said later that she looked like someone who did not need anything from anybody, and that this was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He asked if the seat next to her was taken. She barely looked up from what she was reading. He sat down anyway. She finally looked up, and he could see she was suppressing a smile. He took that as a sign and kept talking. She had looked at him like he was mildly amusing and completely transparent at the same time, Marcus would recall with a grin. Like she could see exactly what he was doing. Most women would have let him off the hook or shut him down. She just looked at him and waited. He had never had to actually earn someone's attention before. It was terrifying. He loved it. He asked her out 3 separate times before she said yes. Not because she was not interested, but because she was paying attention. She was watching to see if the confidence was real or performed, if the persistence would become pressure, if the charm would hold up under the friction of someone who did not immediately give him what he wanted. It held up. She said yes the 3rd time, and they went to dinner at a place neither of them had been, and they talked for 4 hours and closed the restaurant down without noticing. By the time their food arrived, he already felt like he had known her for years. By the time the check came, she felt the same way. That was the thing about Marcus and Elena together. They were easy in the way that genuinely compatible people are easy, where conversation does not require effort because you are both actually interested in each other rather than in the impression you are making. Elena noticed that he talked about his work the way she talked about hers, not to impress anyone, just because he genuinely cared about it. That was rare. Most people perform their passion. His was just sitting right there on the table, unguarded. She thought, this man does not know how to pretend. That might be the most dangerous thing about him. Marcus talked about his work with a passion that was entirely unperformed. Elena asked questions that proved she was listening. She talked about the city planning initiatives she was working on, about the neighborhoods she cared about what she believed good development could do for a community. You listen the way you listen when someone is saying something you have never considered before, but suddenly cannot stop thinking about. For the next 14 months, they were together in the quiet, building way that relationships build when neither person is performing. Coffee and walks, and showing up for each other's ordinary days. No grand gestures. No Instagram moments. Just this steady accumulation of someone becoming essential to your life. At some point, Marcus could not tell you exactly when. He stopped thinking about his day as something that happened to him and started thinking about it as something he was going to tell her about later. That was when he knew. When someone becomes the audience for your own life, that is not convenience. That is something else entirely. And in all of that time, Marcus never once asked Elena about her family beyond the surface. He knew her mother had passed away when she was a child. He knew she was from Savannah. He knew she had a father named Raymond who she spoke about rarely and warmly and without detail. He had no reason to press. Elena made the people around her feel like the most interesting thing in any room, and Marcus was no exception. He was too busy talking about his own world, his own dreams, his own plans to notice that she never offered much about hers. And this was not deception on Elena's part. It was strategy. The strategy of a woman who had learned early that the fastest way to change how someone saw you was to let them find out your last name. She was not ready for that. She wanted more time in the version of her life where she was just Elena first. There were so many times she almost told him. They would be lying in bed talking about the future, and she would think, right now. Tell him right now. And then something would stop her. The fear that his eyes would change. That the way he looked at her, like she was just hers, would shift. She could not bear that. So she waited. And waiting became its own kind of trap. She told herself she would tell him when the moment was right. The moment kept not being right. And then the wedding arrived, and Raymond Brooks flew in from Savannah and was introduced to 30 guests as an old family friend. And he shook Marcus Cole's hand and looked at him for a long time the way a man looks at someone holding something irreplaceable. And then he said 4 words, "Take care of her." Marcus said he would. Raymond nodded. The wedding moved forward. And Elena kept her secret one more day, which became one more week, which became one more month, which became, the way these things become, years. Raymond had shaken that young man's hand and looked at him and thought, he loves her. He could see it. But he also thought, he does not know her. And one day those two things are going to collide. He had prayed he was wrong. He was not wrong. The first year of their marriage was good in the way that first years can be good when two people genuinely like each other and are both working towards something. Marcus's company was growing slowly. Elena was advancing at her job. They were careful with money without being stressed about it. Then Naomi arrived, 7 months into their second year. And everything changed in the way everything changes when a baby comes. Not badly, not catastrophically, but irrevocably. The apartment that had felt cozy felt small. The budget that had felt manageable felt tight. And Marcus's business, which had been growing slowly, hit the kind of wall that small construction companies hit when a major client disputes a contract and the legal fees start accumulating faster than the invoices can cover them. Marcus Cole Construction was in serious financial trouble by the time Naomi was 4 months old. Marcus was working 18-hour days. He was behind on 3 invoices. He had a contract dispute that was going to cost him more to fight than the contract was worth, and he was too proud and too principled to simply let it go. That client had moved every goalpost mid-project and then had the nerve to come after him for the delay. Marcus knew that if he settled, he was admitting to something he did not do. And he had never admitted to something he did not do. That was not stubbornness, he told himself. That was character. At least, that was what he told himself. Elena watched all of this. She watched him carry it. She watched him get quieter over dinner, more distant in the evenings, more rigid in the way he held his shoulders when he came home. She offered to help 3 times. She kept the offers vague on purpose, not wanting to explain where the help could come from. All 3 times, Marcus shut it down with the same sentence. I built this thing myself, and I will fix it myself. Every time he said it, she recognized herself in him. She had built her own ordinary life herself, and she was determined to maintain it herself. She understood his pride because she had her own version of it. She let him have it. Until the night, she could not let him have it anymore. On a Wednesday morning while Naomi was asleep, she called her father. She told him Marcus needed help, but would never accept it if he knew it came from Raymond. Her father said simply, "How much?" That was it. No lecture. No conditions. Just how much. That was who Raymond Brooks was when it came to his daughter. What Elena had done was make one quiet phone call to Raymond Brooks. She told him that Marcus's business was struggling, that the struggle was genuine and not a reflection of Marcus's ability or work ethic, and that she needed it to be made right without Marcus knowing where the help was coming from. She told her father that if Marcus ever found out the money had come from Raymond, it would destroy something in him that she was not sure she could fix. She knew her husband. She knew how the story of his self-made identity was not just a personal narrative, but the entire foundation of his sense of worth. Raymond had made a call. Through 2 layers of private investment holding companies, A bridge loan had materialized for Marcus Cole Construction, offered through a private lender with favorable terms and no public connection to Brooks Capital Group. Raymond Brooks had moved money to save companies that employed thousands of people. Moving it to save his daughter's family cost him nothing and meant everything. His only instruction was clear and simple. She does not carry this alone. Whatever it takes. She does not carry this alone. Marcus had been suspicious of the favorable loan terms at first, thinking he had simply gotten lucky with a lender who believed in his potential. He had accepted it. He had used it to stabilize his business, pay down the most pressing debts, and keep the contracts running. What he did not know, what he had no way of knowing, was that his mother, Diane Cole, had been doing her own investigation from the moment she noticed that the loan appeared from nowhere with terms that were almost too generous. Diane was sharp. Diane had always been sharp. And she had been watching Elena from the very beginning of their relationship with a suspicion that she had never voiced aloud because she had no evidence to attach it to. She had noticed things about Elena that spoke of a different kind of upbringing. The ease, the quiet confidence, the complete absence of financial anxiety even during the lean months. Diane had made some calls of her own. She had not found the full picture, but she had found enough to make a calculation. She was not ashamed of what she did, Diane would say later. A mother protects her son's interests. She saw an opportunity that her son was too in love to see for himself. She made a move. Anyone who said they would not have done the same thing was lying to themselves. She asked Marcus for money, framing it as a debt she needed help with, and Marcus, being the son who took care of his family, wrote her a check without asking enough questions. Diane had used it to put a down payment on an investment property she had been watching for months. She told herself she would pay it back. She had told herself a number of things. Meanwhile, Elena's baby was getting sick, and Marcus's business was still fragile, and the secret Elena had been carrying for years was about to surface in the worst possible way. It was a Tuesday night in early February. Marcus was at the kitchen table with his laptop open, searching for a vendor receipt he needed for a billing dispute. He was exhausted and behind, carrying the weight of the business the way he always carried it, alone, because that was the only way he knew how. He searched through a series of old forwarded emails and found, buried in a folder Elena had created months before to organize household documents, a letter she had forwarded to herself and apparently forgotten was there. It was a formal letter from Brooks Capital Group, addressed to Elena, not as a customer, not as a client, as a beneficiary. He typed the name into Google. The face that came up, he recognized it. He had shaken that man's hand at his own wedding, and he sat there in his kitchen and thought, she watched me kill myself every single day, and she said nothing. She said nothing. He read the letter 3 times. He typed Brooks Capital Group into the search bar. Raymond Brooks's face appeared in under 3 seconds. The Forbes profile loaded. The net worth figure was listed clearly, $4.3 billion. Marcus Cole sat in his kitchen in his struggling apartment with his baby asleep in the next room and looked at a photograph of a man he had shaken hands with at his own wedding. A man who had been introduced as an old family friend. A man whose daughter he had married. A man Elena had never mentioned. Not once. Not in 3 years. What Marcus felt in that moment was not simply anger. That is the important thing to understand. What he felt was shame. Immediate, retroactive, overwhelming shame. Every conversation in which he had complained about money in front of Elena, and she had listened patiently and said nothing. Every time he had been too proud to accept her offer of help, and she had waited and not pushed. Every time he had positioned himself as the provider, the man keeping this family together through sheer force of will, and she had let him have that, had watched him from behind something she was holding. If he had come to her that night, if he had just come to her and said, I found it, explain it to me, they would have talked. They would have worked through it. Elena had been waiting years to have that conversation. She just needed him to come to her. He did not come to her. He did not say anything to Elena that night. He did not say anything the next day either. He carried it the way men who have been raised to believe that their worth is entirely constructed from what they build tend to carry things that threaten that belief, sideways and festering, and growing larger and uglier in the carrying. 3 days later, Naomi's cough became a fever. Elena checked the temperature at 11 in the evening. It was climbing. She called the pediatric nurse line and was told to go to the emergency room if the fever crested 103 degrees. By 11:45 it had. Elena bundled Naomi carefully, the way a mother who has barely slept in weeks moves, on pure determination and love rather than energy. She told Marcus. He barely responded, but he got up. He got the car. He drove them to Grady Memorial Hospital without saying a single word. Elena sat in the back seat with Naomi and felt the silence between her and her husband like a physical presence, something solid and wrong. The whole drive, Marcus kept seeing that letter in his head. For $0.3 billion. And he was sitting there white-knuckling the steering wheel in a truck he was still paying off. Every mile felt like an insult he had not been told about. They sat in the emergency room waiting area for 2 hours. Plastic chairs. Fluorescent lights. A television on the wall with the sound too low to understand. Other families in their own private emergencies around them. Naomi fell asleep against Elena's chest somewhere in the second hour, her small body radiating heat. Her breathing labored in the way that made Elena's chest tight every time she felt it. Marcus sat 2 seats away with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the floor. And then, sometime after 2 in the morning, he said it quietly, without looking up. "I know about your father." 3 words. And Elena went completely still. Not because she was shocked that he knew. She was still because of the tone. Because the 3 words did not land like a question or a beginning. They landed like an ending. She told him she had never lied to him. That she had kept something private. And that those were not the same thing. He looked at her like she had said something in a language he did not speak. And she understood then that his pride had already decided what the story was. She was not going to be able to rewrite it that night. She said his name. She told him this was not the time. He told her she had been lying to him for 3 years. She told him she had never lied to him, that she had kept something private, that those were not the same thing. He told her she had watched him kill himself for this family, while sitting on knowledge that could have made everything easier. And she told him the only true thing she had, that she had kept it from him because she wanted him to love her for herself and not for what her father's name and money could offer. That sentence, that true and heartbreaking sentence, was the one Marcus Cole could not hear in that moment, because his pride was louder than everything else in that waiting room. He heard every word Marcus would say later. He heard her, but he was so deep inside his own wound that he could not get to what she was actually saying. He kept hearing what he was afraid it meant instead of what it actually meant. He stood up. He said he needed air. She said his name again, told him Naomi was sick, asked him to stay. He walked out of the waiting area. He walked down the corridor. He pushed through the exit doors into the cold Atlanta night. And Elena, running on no sleep and a grief that had been building for days and had just broken the surface all at once, stood up too fast from her chair. She collapsed. The anemia that had been quietly accumulating in her body for months, the exhaustion, the shock of the confrontation, all of it hit at once, and her legs gave out. Naomi, disturbed by the fall, slid from her arms and landed on the floor beside her and began to wail. A nurse who was passing 3 rooms down came running. Marcus Cole was already in the parking lot. The security camera timestamp showed 2:14 in the morning, February 14th, Valentine's Day. When they told Raymond what happened, his daughter on the floor, the baby on the floor, and Marcus already gone, he did not raise his voice. He asked only one question. How fast could his helicopter be ready? By 6 in the morning, Elena had been diagnosed with acute exhaustion compounded by severe anemia. The doctors told her she had been running on empty for months, and her body had simply stopped compensating. Naomi was diagnosed with RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, common in infants, frightening but entirely treatable. They were both going to be fine. But the damage of that night was not physical, and the physical was the smallest part of what had happened. At 7:23 in the morning, a clip appeared on social media. Somebody who worked at that hospital had captured a portion of the security camera footage on their phone and posted it with a caption that read, "This man just left his wife and infant on the hospital floor and walked out." Valentine's Day. At 2 in the morning. Someone needs to find this woman. By 8 o'clock it had thousands of shares. By noon it had millions of views. By 3 in the afternoon, Marcus Cole's face, blurry but identifiable, his contractor's jacket still on from the day before, was being picked out in the comments by people who knew him in Atlanta. The internet had found its villain. It had found its victim. It had decided, as the internet always decides, that it understood everything. And it had gotten the shape of the story approximately right in the 7 in the morning and noon. She did not answer. He drove to the hospital at 1 in the afternoon and walked up to the front desk and asked for Elena Cole. The receptionist looked at her screen for a long moment, and then she said, "I am sorry, sir. There is a notation on this patient's file. You have been listed as a restricted visitor." Marcus Cole stood at that desk for a full minute without speaking. Then he walked back out to his truck and sat there for 3 hours. The notifications buzzing on his phone, hundreds of times, eventually thousands, from people who had seen the clip and were now looking for him, went mostly unread. He was not thinking about the internet. He was thinking about a letter in an email folder and a name in a search engine and 4 words at a wedding that he now understood differently than he had the day he heard them. Sitting in that truck, that was when it started to crack. Not the anger. The story he had been telling himself. The whole story. About who he was and what he had built and what he deserved. He kept asking himself, did she ever once use it against me? Did she ever once make me feel less than? And the answer, every single time, was no. She had not. He had done that all by himself. Detective Lena Ford had not been assigned to the case because technically no crime had been committed. Abandoning a spouse in a hospital is not a criminal offense. But the viral footage had landed on the desk of her captain along with a note from a city council member's office asking for a welfare check situation review. Ford looked into it. She was thorough in the particular way that detectives become thorough when something about a case does not quite add up to its surface presentation. She pulled financial records. She looked at Marcus Cole Construction's loan history. She followed the money the way good investigators follow money. Not toward the obvious answer, but toward the true one. And 3 days into her review, she found the wire transfer. $47,000. From Marcus Cole Construction's business account to a personal account registered to Diane Cole. Made 6 weeks before Naomi was born, at a time, and by a journalist named Tanya Reeves who had been following the story from the moment she noticed the name on the hospital admission form and what it connected to. In that recording, Diane Cole's voice was clipped, urgent, and certain of itself. She told her son, "You were always enough. But now you have leverage. Do you understand what I'm saying, Marcus? That woman's family does not want this story. You have leverage. Use it." That word, leverage, is the word that changed everything. Not the clip of Marcus walking out. Not the Forbes profile. Not the shell companies or the wire transfers. It was one word, spoken by a mother to her son in a parking garage, captured on a phone by a stranger. Because leverage meant that what Diane Cole saw when she looked at the situation was not a marriage in crisis, not a sick baby, not a woman on a hospital floor. What she saw was a negotiating position. And that reframing, her son's life as a transaction, was the thing that, when Elena's attorneys heard the recording, shifted the entire legal strategy of what came next. Raymond Brooks spent 40 minutes with his daughter in that hospital room. He held her while she cried. He looked at his granddaughter in the hospital crib, tiny and hooked to a monitor, but breathing better already. And then he walked into the hallway and made 2 phone calls. By the time he got back in his helicopter, 3 things had been set in motion. Elena's medical bills, all of them, were paid in full before she was discharged. 2 of the most prominent family law attorneys in the state of Georgia had been retained on Elena's behalf without her asking. And a quiet investigation had been opened, not by police, but by Brooks Capital Group's private security division, staffed by former federal investigators who were very good at finding things that people believed were well hidden. Raymond Brooks had done his homework on Marcus Cole before the wedding. He had run a background check, found certain things, and said nothing out of respect for his daughter's choice. He was now saying something, through people who did not raise their voices and did not have to. Elena would say later that her father did not ask her what she wanted him to do. He simply handled the immediate things, the bills, the lawyers. And then he sat next to her and said, "When you are ready, tell me what you want to happen. Not what I want. What you want." It was the only time in her life she had ever been grateful to be Raymond Brooks's daughter in a room with other people watching. Tanya Reeves was a blogger with a modest following who had been covering the viral story the same way hundreds of other commentators were covering it. As an outrage story, as a morality tale, as a simple and satisfying story about a bad man and a woman who deserved better. But Tanya was sharper than most. She had noticed, in a zoomed-in screenshot that someone had shared on social media showing a portion of Elena's hospital admission form, that the next of kin listed was not Marcus Cole. It was our Brooks' father. The area code on the contact number was a Savannah exchange. Tanya knew Savannah. She knew what that particular area code meant in terms of the kind of people who had private lines there. She typed the name and the city and the word billionaire into a search engine, and Raymond Brooks appeared in 4 seconds. She sat at her desk with her coffee going cold, and she looked at the screen and understood that the story she had been covering was approximately 1/10 of the actual story. She called 3 people before she published a single word. A lawyer, a financial reporter she trusted, and a source who had covered Raymond Brooks once before. All 3 of them said the same thing. "Tanya, if you have this right, be careful. And be fast. Because you are not going to be the only one who figures this out." Tanya Reeves published her full investigation 14 days after the hospital incident. By that time, Elena's attorneys had already been in possession of the recording from the parking garage. By that time, Detective Ford had already delivered her financial narrative inquiry to the DA's office. By that time, Marcus Cole had already driven 5 hours to Savannah, found the address of Raymond Brooks's estate, and slipped an envelope under the front door without knocking. He drove back to Atlanta the same night. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter. 3 pages. The kind of letter a man writes when he has stopped defending himself and started seeing himself clearly. Elena did not open it the night it arrived. She left it on the kitchen table of the guest room she was staying in at her father's estate and looked at it for 2 days before she finally sat down with a cup of tea in the early morning and read it alone. He wrote that he had spent his whole life defining himself by what he could give people, and that when he found out, when he realized the truth about the loan, about her father, about the money that had quietly kept his business alive, he felt like a man who had been handed a trophy he had not earned, and that the shame of that feeling had overwhelmed everything else in that hospital waiting room. He wrote that he understood now, with the clarity that only comes from sitting alone with yourself long enough, that Elena had not kept her secret out of condescension or control. She had kept it out of the same desire for authenticity that had led her to Howard University, that had led her to the government job, that had led her to a small apartment in Atlanta when she could have been living anywhere in the world. She had kept it because she wanted to be loved for herself, and he had been loving her for herself. And then the moment he found out he could not hold both truths at once, the truth of who she was and the truth of what she came from, and his pride had made the choice for him before his heart had a chance to. He wrote that she had loved him the way he had always wanted to be loved, seen for who he was, not what he had, and that he had been so terrified of that love, so certain he was not enough for it, that he had destroyed it the moment he felt unworthy. He wrote that, and he meant every word of it, and he still did not know if words were enough. Elena read that line, the line about earning trust before inheriting it, 4 times. She did not call Marcus the day she read the letter. She sat with it. She sat with everything. The letter, the legal proceedings that were moving forward, the recording of Diane's voice saying the word leverage, the deposition being scheduled, the civil complaint being filed against Diane Cole, the financial documents laid out across a conference room table that mapped every hidden thing of the last 3 years. She sat with all of it. And then one morning, 3 weeks after she read the letter, she picked up her phone. She called him and she said, "I see you trying." That was it. Those 4 words. Because she needed him to know that she was watching. That she had always been watching. And that trying was not nothing. It was not everything. But it was not nothing. The deposition of Marcus Jerome Cole took place 17 days after the hospital incident. In a law office with marble floors and attorneys whose calm was the particular calm of people who do not need to raise their voices to be the most powerful people in the room. Over 4 hours, Marcus's financial history was laid out with surgical precision. The bridge loan, the holding companies, the connection to Brooks Capital Group, the fact that Marcus had not known, established clearly and factually for the record. And the moment when Marcus understood, sitting in that deposition chair, that the money he had built his survival on had come from his father-in-law. The expression on his face was described by every person in that room as something they did not forget. Because he finally understood. She had not pitted him. She had protected him. The way you protect someone you love who you know would never let you protect them back. She had found the only way in, and he had walked out on her for it. His attorney called a recess. In the hallway, a paralegal described Marcus sitting against the wall with his face in his hands, not performing it, just quietly broken in the way that has no performance in it because there is no audience for it. Just a man alone with what he did. Meanwhile, in a separate legal filing on the same day, Raymond Brooks's attorneys submitted a civil complaint against Diane Cole for financial misrepresentation. The complaint was not designed to imprison her. It was designed, with the precision of people who had done this before, to ensure that Diane Cole understood clearly and legally that her involvement in her son and daughter-in-law's affairs was permanently concluded. Diane Cole had thought she was protecting him. She wanted that on record. But what she had not understood, what she should have understood, was that sometimes protecting someone means trusting them to handle their own life. She had not trusted him. She had handled it for him. And she had been wrong. Diane Cole sold the investment property. She did not attend Naomi's first birthday party. Marcus did not discuss this publicly. Those close to him said he grieved it. Not the money, not the property, but the realization of who his mother was beneath the image he had held of her his entire life. That grief, several people close to him observed, was the thing that finally made him understand what Elena had been protecting him from. Not money. The truth about people who love you and what they will do when the stakes get high enough. Elena Brooks did not file for divorce. This surprised almost everyone. Her attorneys. Her father's advisors. Tanya Reeves, whose article had now been read 11 million times in 72 hours, shared across 44 countries, turned into a conversation that was happening in homes and offices and comment sections everywhere about pride and secrets and love and what we owe each other when we choose each other. Elena declined every interview request. Raymond Brooks issued one statement, 8 sentences, ending with, "My daughter is not a story. She is a woman. Please let her be one." Raymond Brooks had spent his life building things that last. The only thing he had ever built that he was truly proud of was her. And she did not need his protection. She never had. She just needed his respect. He should have found better ways to show that sooner. 6 months after February 14th, Elena Brooks returned to work at the City of Atlanta Urban Development Office. She had taken a leave of absence. She came back. Her colleagues said she seemed lighter, not because the burden was gone, but because she was no longer carrying it alone. Marcus completed his 60-day accountability program. His company had folded during the legal and public chaos of the story going viral. He was rebuilding, smaller, slower, more honestly. He saw Naomi every Wednesday and alternating weekends. He was not late. Not once.
And Elena, a beautiful black American woman in her late 20s, rich, deep brown complexion, natural thick dark wavy hair loose around her shoulders, was seen most mornings pushing a stroller along the Atlanta Beltline, stopping to talk to the neighbors she had always known, living the ordinary life she had chosen, not running from her name anymore, but not defined by it either. Just Elena. Just herself. In the middle of her own real life. She would say, when people asked if she had forgiven him, that the honest answer was, she was working on it. Every day? Not for him. For Naomi. And for herself. Because carrying unforgiveness is heavier than carrying a secret, and she had been carrying heavy things long enough. She was ready to put some of it down. And so, that is where we leave them. Marcus Cole, rebuilding. Raymond Brooks, watching from a respectful distance. Diane Cole, quieter now. Detective Ford, on to the next case. Tanya Reeves, with 300,000 new followers and a follow-up piece in progress. And Elena, just Elena, still sitting with the biggest question of her life. Not the money, not the lawyers, not the recordings, or the depositions, or the viral clips. The question she is sitting with is the same one she sat with the morning she read that letter. The same one she sat with every day that followed. Is the man he is becoming the man she married? She has not answered yet. Maybe the most honest thing about this whole story is that she is still deciding. And maybe, just maybe, that is exactly how it should be. Now I want to hear from you. Did Marcus Cole deserve a second chance? Or was walking out of that hospital on Valentine's Day the line that cannot be uncrossed? Drop your answer in the comments below. And tell us, if you had been Elena, with everything she knew and everything she had, what would you have done? We read every single comment. If this story moved you, share it, because these are the conversations that matter. And subscribe and hit that bell, because the next story we are covering is one that will stop you in your tracks. A woman who disappeared from her own life, walked away from everything, started completely over, and the people left behind who could not decide whether to be angry or inspired. That story is coming. Do not miss it.